Thank you so much, Jared. It's great to be here today. Hi, everybody. Thanks for giving up a half hour of your time to talk about one of my favorite topics, storytelling and library advocacy. So I'm going to share my slides and we will get going. Okay. So as Jared said, I have been working on library advocacy for over a decade now and really got into it because of my role as a public library director. And I was a small public library director, as I think most of you know. Population of Bow, New Hampshire is under 8,000. And mainly my advocacy had to do with community groups. Now that ranged the gamut from select boards and budget committees to Rotary, the school board, school administration, the garden club, all these different entities where, throwing statistics and facts at people, what I found was it often didn't change people's minds. So that's what we're going to look at today is how do we try to affect changing people's minds, particularly around municipal budgeting. So this is our agenda. We're going to talk about briefly what is library advocacy, why stats overload does not help, storytelling and brain research, and then the practical stuff, how to find and create stories, what the structure is that I have used for over a decade. And I'll give you an example of a story that I used successfully with a joint budget committee select board meeting, how to collect stories, and then library stories as ongoing advocacy. We will have a Q&A piece at the end, which I believe Jared said we will stop the recording then. But if you do have questions, feel free to put them in the chat or save them to the end so that you can ask them directly. So first of all, what is library advocacy? Library advocates believe in the importance of free and equitable access to information. And libraries and librarians are vital to the future of an information literate nation. I think it's important that we remember this goal. Oftentimes in the daily to-do lists of maintaining a library, particularly a small public library, we lose this perspective. Why do we do the things we do? This is the why. We believe in free and equitable access to information. That's why we are trying to advocate for libraries, library funding, and things that are going to help our community members make their lives better. So I wanted to start off with that so that you can always remember, and I would encourage everyone to put this particular quote up on your wall so you can remember it and read it when you get bogged down with the day-to-day. So why policy advocacy in particular matters for librarians. And I can just see in my head how people are starting to twitch when I add the word policy to advocacy. But there is a reason for this. And I want to try to sort of tweak your perspective a little bit so that you can see why this is important. So policy in its most simplistic form is a solution to a problem. Library budgets that have municipal funding are policy. It's the policy that is created by voters who vote in certain things to fund. It is policy. So framing and focusing your advocacy around the core problem you want to solve really does increase your odds of success, and making sure you're consistent in articulating that core piece is vital. Going over some of the key things to focus on if you're talking about this piece. So keep that problem you're trying to solve at the front and center of your advocacy efforts, and storytelling is one piece of the whole pie. We're going to focus on the storytelling aspect today. Remember that good advocates are not necessarily the people with the most formal power. Also, I want to remind you that the most powerful library advocates are often not the ones who are actually using the library. My big thing about this piece is I remember when we were doing the renovation at the Baker Free Library, and the first donor to that renovation was a longtime community member who never had a library card. He came into the library with a check after he heard we announced that the fundraising had started. So remembering that not everybody who walks into your building is your best library advocate is really important, and it's a perspective you need to maintain. Develop and improve your expertise in storytelling so your conversations are productive, persuasive arguments rather than fights. What does this really mean in practicality? Storytelling takes practice. Not all of us are born storytellers, but we can become better storytellers and advocates by practicing. And that's one of the key things I'm hoping you'll go away with today. So most of us as librarians, and I was guilty of this when I was a new public library director, I tended to think, well, if I give them the facts around how successful our library is with this service, this service, this service, this service, they're going to increase my funding. Nothing can be further from the truth. And this quote came from the study that happened both in 2008, and then there was a revisit to the study in 2018. It's OCLC's From Awareness to Funding, a study of library support in America. Library funding supporters are not swayed by messages that detail library services delivered, but rather by messages that remind them of the library's impact on their community. If you go away with just one thing today, I'm hoping you go away with the idea that the community needs to be central to your advocacy message. It is not about the library. It is about the impact of the library on the community. So you need to focus on what are the community needs that your library is helping to address. Talking about numbers makes people's eyes glaze over. However, talking about a specific statistic that supports a story you just told often wraps it up in a neat package that people will remember. So brain research. There are a number of different studies that have been done on storytelling and particularly around advocacy. And the article, How Stories Change the Brain from 2013 is one that really struck home with me. So this two studies that came out of that this was based on were about having people watch a video that dealt with a boy named Ben and his father. The first video was about how Ben's father is talking to the camera that Ben is dying. He has cancer. And he tells us how difficult it is for him, he as the father, to be joyful because he knows what's coming, but that he needs to find the strength to be genuinely happy for the time that Ben has left. So there's that piece. Then the other group watched a video where it's still Ben and his father. They're at a zoo, they're visiting the giraffes. There's no mention of death and dying. There's no mention of why Ben is bald, what the unhappiness that you can see on the father's face. And the results of this study were that people became emotionally, I don't want to say triggered, emotionally checked into the first video. And most of the people who watched the video then were very willing to donate to brain cancer research. Whereas the second video, they noticed that the participants checked out about halfway through because there was no emotional engagement. Again, you're trying to get people to see themselves in the characters of a story. It doesn't mean, and when I say story, I want to just make sure that you understand stories doesn't mean that it's fiction. Stories means that you are telling, you're talking about a situation in a structured manner where there is, as it says in this article, and you can all read the article because it's linked here, that every engaging story has a dramatic arc. It starts with something new and surprising, increases with tensions because of the difficulties that characters have to overcome. And often this is because of some crisis in their lives. And then it leads to the climax where the characters overcome the crisis and the story resolves itself. That's what we're talking about. That's the kind of structure that works. So the 5 elements I've used around this for a good library story came from ALA's Advocacy Bootcamp, which I first took, I believe it was 2012, 2011, with Jamie LaRue, who Jared mentioned before, used to be a staff member at ALA. And it's a pretty simple structure. You have a real person, you have a real problem, you describe the library intervention, then there's a happy ending of some kind, and then 1 or 2 facts that support your ask. And again, going back to what we talked to in the beginning, what is the important policy ask you're making? Are you asking for more funding? Are you asking for another staff position, which means more funding. It's usually more funding. So let me give you an example of a story that I told in 2015 to the Board of Selectmen and Budget Committee joint meeting for the town of Bow's budget. I'm going to ask you at the end of the story to, in the chat, identify these elements in my story. Monique and John have 3 kids under the age of 10 and live in Hopkinton, New Hampshire. They both work full-time during the week, and with John's mother in poor health, they often use their sick time for either her doctor appointments or their kids' sick time from school and daycare. Monique's parents live in England. They would like to take the kids to visit their grandparents during the summer and need to get passports for all 3 of them. Through friends, they know that getting a passport at the Concord post office is not an easy experience. Even if an appointment is made, it's not always honored due to post office staffing. And worse, the only times that new passport appointments can be made are during the week, meaning that John and Monique would need to take time off from work. One day at a regional Girl Scout meeting, Monique mentioned how she knew she had to get this process going, but was really dreading it. One of the other mothers mentioned that the library in neighboring Bow, New Hampshire was now a passport acceptance facility, and how it was a really great experience when she took her daughter over there to get her new passport. Monique went home, checked out the library website, and called to make an appointment when she saw the service was not limited to Bow residents. She was thrilled to make the appointment for a Saturday. Now her and her husband would not have to take time off from work. On the day of the appointment, they took the 3 kids over, and while each one had their passport application reviewed, the other 2 were in the children's section playing with various toys and reading books. John was so impressed by the staff and the fact that the library would receive some of the money he paid for the passport service that he went into work on Monday and told anyone who would listen about the great things the library in Bow was doing to help families, not just in Bow, but neighboring towns. In 2016, Baker Free Library brought in over $10,000 in passport revenue that was used to support the first year of digital downloadable content in Hoopla. Due to demand, the library is asking for increased municipal funding to supplement the resident digital content needs for Bow. So I'd like to ask people to put in the chat, who was the person? So the first element of our story. Anybody? This is the interactive portion of our recording. Maybe Jared can jump in with his. The mom, yes, Monique, thank you, thank you. So what was the problem? I hope y'all remember the problem. They couldn't take off work to get their passports. Excellent, yes. So the library did an intervention. What was the intervention? It's, you know this. They allowed non-residents to use the service, having the passport service for others. Yes. And the happy ending? Everyone goes to England. Thank you, Michelle. That's great. Last thing, 1 or 2 facts that supported that. What was my ask in that at the end? More money for Hoopla and other digital resources. Exactly right. So I'm telling you, this works because I did this and we did get the funding. It was passed by both the select board had already passed it, but the budget committee put it in, approved 7-0. And then it did pass a town meeting because Bow has town meeting. But the really amazing piece was 2 years later, a member of that budget committee group who had since gone off the budget committee ran into me in the grocery store and talked to me about that story. It really did resonate for them because they could put themselves in the shoes of the parents, Monique and John, or just dealing with trying to wrangle kids to get something done, or having to do stuff during the week when there are no weekend hours for what you're trying to accomplish. There are a lot of different ways somebody could relate to that story. So here's some community centering and best practices, and I'm hoping you will consider creating your own stories that you can use throughout your community, not just during budget time, but throughout the year when you're talking to people in your community. First, stories about library impact on communities are usually new pieces of information because people tend to equate library equals books on shelves. So remember, when you're doing a story, this is most likely new information to people. They can easily get hooked if you have the right emotional hook built in there. Centering any story on a community need or an individual community member issue is the key to triggering that empathy that changes minds. There's more detail about what happens in your brain when this empathy is triggered in that article that I have the link to earlier in the slide presentation. So any story that solves a community or family problem will resonate with listeners because they can put themselves in the shoes of those people. Do not center the library in your stories. When I have done this kind of training with other library staff and volunteers, one of the common mistakes is that when you're creating your story, you start with the real person, you start with the problem, then you get to the library intervention, and then the story becomes all about the library intervention from then on. That's not helpful. You need to say what the library intervention was, but then bring it back to the individual and how their problem was solved and how that impacted their life. Stories should be based on real life situations. Mine was. This was based on an email, and then I had a phone conversation with the father. I mentioned John. He went and told everybody at work. He actually sent an email to me, and then I had a conversation with him, and I based this story on that conversation. So make sure, though, you change the names and circumstances of those people, especially if you're in a small town, because you don't want people to be readily identifiable. I was lucky in this case where he was from outside of the town of Bow, so I didn't have to worry as much about that. I still changed the names. His name really wasn't John. Only associate 1 or 2 stats about the library with the story. And at the end, when you do that, you're bringing it home to what your ask is. Again, what are you trying to get? Most likely, you're trying to get some kind of support or funding. So make sure that you're bringing it home with 1, max 2 stats. That's it. Any more, people are going to glaze over and they're going to forget about the story, and their minds are going to be trying to make sense of the numbers. You don't want that to happen. So how do you collect these? So I would start, and this is how I collected some really great stories when I was in Bow. Empower your frontline staff to write down particular interactions in a notebook, or there's stuff from, it can be either in person or email, phone. These things can form the basis of a story that centers an individual problem with a solution. Solicit your volunteers for stories about how the library has impacted their lives. Why did they choose to volunteer at the library? Usually there's a story associated with that then can be translated into that emotional hook that will help people support whatever it is that that story refers to. Ask your board members about why they chose to become involved in your particular library. For some, that's not going to be as easy an ask as for others, but it's still, you should try it out on 1 or 2 of your board members just to see their reaction. And frankly, if you have sort of a tension relationship with some of your board members, asking them about their own experiences and that you're interested in them often thaws things. So you could use this as a relationship building tool as well, not just a storytelling tool for advocacy. And library stories really are a pathway to ongoing advocacy that's year-round, which is what we really need to do. So to get started, I would write those 5 story elements down, and there will be a handout that will be emailed to all of you that has those 5 elements on a Word document where you can then fill it in. It'll help you formulate the story outline and really decide what words to use. Shorter, the better. Pick or choose one story to test out either at a board meeting or at a library staff meeting. Make this a regular part of a monthly board or staff meeting. This is practice. And that also will generate interest. I did this with my board, and it generated interest on their part to have stories that they could tell when they were out at the soccer game at the high school or at the garden club participating. You know, getting them interested and used to the storytelling aspect will work wonders over time. And again, it's building it up over time. This isn't going to happen overnight. And if you are asking for a particular funding increase, be intentional about the stories you want shared by all of your different advocacy groups, leadership, staff, volunteers, your friends group, your board members. Make sure they all hit on a similar theme. That is really helpful because it'll be more memorable to the people who hear them, and the support will be more likely. And I can say that this works because this is what I did when we did our renovation at the Baker Free Library in Bow that took 4 years of fundraising. And we were very intentional about the stories we told around those fundraising efforts. And I'll just leave you at last with this thought. There is no single approach or magic recipe for successful advocacy. The only common element to every attempt is persistence. So make sure you're persistent, not just with your ask of your stakeholders, but be persistent in your efforts. Practice. I can't emphasize this enough. Practice your storytelling. It will make you a better orator, which I'm sure that's a great goal for all of you. I'm kidding. But it is a helpful thing to do. And you don't have to be a director to cultivate this skill. All levels of library staff and volunteers can build on this skill. And as I said previously, some of your best advocates are the people who are not regularly in your library building. Thank you for listening. I appreciate your time today, and we'll go to Q&A now, and I'll stop sharing.